The church doors slammed open, not from the wind, not from a latecomer rushing in, but from a convoy of 8 black luxury vehicles that had just pulled into the parking lot. Silent, polished, and moving with the kind of quiet authority that stops every conversation in a room. Inside the church, 300 guests turned their heads at once, and Marcus Bennett, standing at the altar in a rented tuxedo, stared at the woman beside him, the woman everyone had spent the last 6 months calling a mistake, and watched as tears began to roll silently down her cheeks. She had known this moment was coming. She had been dreading it, and yet nothing could have prepared any of them. Not Marcus, not his mother, not a single whispering guest. For what was about to walk through those church doors and change everything they thought they knew. Because the woman they called ordinary wasn't, and the secret she had been carrying for 3 years was finally about to walk into the room. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened that Saturday in September, you have to go back, all the way back to a rainy Thursday evening 18 months earlier, to a community food pantry on the east side of a small American town, where a school teacher named Marcus Bennett first noticed a woman who would quietly, completely, and permanently rearrange his entire life. Marcus was 34 years old. He taught 5th grade at Lincoln Elementary. He drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and 1 working window. He coached junior soccer on weekends without pay, showed up at every school fundraiser, and remembered the names of every one of his students' parents. He was, by every measure, a good man. But in his mother's eyes, goodness without wealth was a kind of poverty. Evelyn Bennett was 62, sharp-tongued and deeply proud. She had raised Marcus alone after his father passed from a sudden heart attack when Marcus was just 11. She had worked 2 jobs for 12 years to keep them housed, fed, and respectable. And in her mind, respectability meant one thing above all else: who you married. Marcus, she had told him more times than he could count, a good woman can love you and still come from the right family. Don't let your kindness make you a fool. She had introduced him to the daughters of doctors, lawyers, and property developers. She had arranged dinners and Sunday lunches and casual meetups that were anything but casual. And every single time, Marcus had smiled politely, driven the woman home, and never called again. He wasn't looking for a resume. He was looking for a person. He found one on a Thursday evening when the rain wouldn't stop. The food pantry was supposed to close at 7. By 8:15, most of the volunteers had packed up and gone home. But when Marcus pushed through the back door with the last of the canned goods, he saw her. A woman, maybe early 30s, quietly stacking boxes in the corner. No fuss, no announcement. Just working. Her name tag said Grace. "You don't have to stay," Marcus said. "We're done for the night." She looked up. She had calm eyes and a small, composed smile, the kind that didn't ask for anything back. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to finish." That was it. That was all. But Marcus stood there for 3 extra seconds longer than he needed to, and somewhere in those 3 seconds, something shifted. They began running into each other every Thursday. Then they started talking. Then the talking became longer than the volunteering. Then, one evening in February, standing outside in the cold with paper cups of bad coffee, Marcus realized he had been at the pantry for 4 hours and had spent most of it in conversation with Grace Walker, and that it had felt like 40 minutes. She was warm. She was thoughtful. She listened with her full attention in a way that made you feel like the only person in any room. She had a quiet, dry sense of humor that she deployed so suddenly and perfectly that it consistently made Marcus laugh out loud. And she cared, genuinely, practically cared, about people nobody else was looking at. But she was private in a way that Marcus couldn't quite place. She lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an unremarkable building. She drove a 2007 Nissan Sentra that rattled faintly when it idled. She wore simple clothes, clean, well-kept, but never expensive. She had no Instagram, no Facebook, no digital footprint of any kind that Marcus could find. And whenever a conversation drifted toward her family, her background, or her past, she would listen carefully to his version of the question and then answer a slightly different question instead. So smoothly, so gently, that Marcus often didn't notice the redirection until an hour later. He noticed. He just didn't push. Because whatever Grace was carrying, she carried it with grace. And that, he decided, was enough. For now. By April, they were inseparable. By June, Marcus was certain. He told his mother. The dinner that followed was the longest of Marcus's adult life. Evelyn sat across from Grace with a polite smile that never reached her eyes and asked questions that were shaped like friendliness but landed like interrogations. What do your parents do? Where did you grow up? What did you study? Where do you work now? Grace answered each question calmly, briefly, and honestly. But the answers gave Evelyn almost nothing to hold on to. No family business, no notable address, no impressive title. Just a woman who worked part-time at a nonprofit and volunteered at a food pantry and seemed, to Evelyn's trained eye, to come from absolutely nowhere. After Grace left that evening, Evelyn turned to her son. Marcus. Her voice was low. She has no family, no career, no background. What exactly do you know about this woman? I know who she is, Mom. You know who she seems to be. That's different. Marcus drove home that night with his jaw tight and his hand steady on the wheel. He wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of a world that measured people in the wrong units. The months that followed were a slow escalation of tension. Evelyn recruited cousins, aunts, and family friends into a quiet campaign of concern. Have you met her, people? Something isn't right. Marcus is making a mistake. Whispers spread through their social circle like water finding cracks. Grace absorbed it all. She never snapped, never cried in front of anyone, never retaliated. When Marcus's Aunt Patricia made a sharp comment about her clothes at a family cookout, Grace smiled and passed her the potato salad. When his cousin Derek asked loudly whether she had a trust fund nobody knew about, meaning it as a joke that wasn't, she laughed softly and said, "If I do, I haven't found the paperwork." But strange things were happening around Grace that Marcus couldn't entirely ignore. Twice, he arrived at her apartment and found expensive flower arrangements outside her door with no sender cards. Once, glancing from her window, he saw a black SUV idling across the street. Still, patient, and gone by the time he looked again 5 minutes later. And on 4 separate occasions, Grace had stepped away mid-conversation to take phone calls she never explained, returning each time looking slightly older than she had when she left. "Everything okay?" he asked one evening after the 4th time. "Yes," she said. And then, after a pause, "I just have some things I'm working through." He let it go. In August, Marcus proposed. He did it at the food pantry, after hours, between the shelves of canned beans and powdered milk, deliberately, because that was where he had found her. He had a ring that had cost him 4 months of saved lunches. Grace looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "Marcus," her voice was careful, "if one day you find out I'm not exactly who you think I am, will it matter? Will it change anything?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm not in love with a biography, Grace. I'm in love with you. Whatever there is to find out, we find it out together." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were very bright. "Okay," she said quietly. "Yes." What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that in saying yes, Grace had made a decision she had been wrestling with for 3 years. A decision that would require her, before this story was over, to let the thing she had run from finally find her. The wedding was set for September, and as summer turned, The pressure from Evelyn reached a kind of desperate peak. She called Marcus daily. She showed up at his apartment with printed articles about compatibility and financial stability in relationships. She cried once, genuinely, openly cried, and told him she was terrified he was throwing his life away on someone who was hiding something terrible. Marcus was patient. And then, one morning 2 weeks before the wedding, he was not. "Mom?" His voice was quiet, which was worse than if it had been loud. "I need you to hear me. I am marrying Grace. I am doing it because I love her and because she is the best person I have ever known. And I need you, I am asking you, to trust me on this. Because if you can't do that, then I don't know how we move forward." Evelyn looked at her son for a long moment. Then she nodded. One small, unconvinced nod. But 3 days before the wedding, she hired a private investigator. The investigator's report came back 48 hours later, and it told Evelyn almost nothing. No criminal record, no debt, no lawsuits, no social media. Employment history that was real but unremarkable. And prior to 5 years ago, almost nothing. As if Grace Walker had materialized from thin air at age 27 and started living a quiet, modest, deliberately invisible life. The investigator noted, almost as an afterthought, that the complete absence of a digital and financial footprint in the modern era was itself unusual, that it sometimes indicated a deliberate removal, that someone with resources, or someone with powerful connections, could make that happen. Evelyn read the report 3 times. Then she put it in her purse and went to bed without sleeping. On the morning of the wedding, she found Marcus in the church hallway before anyone else arrived. She took his arm. She looked him directly in the eyes, and she said, "Son, don't embarrass this family today. There is still time." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, I love you. But today, I'm choosing my wife." He turned and walked toward the altar. Evelyn sat in the front pew and held her purse with both hands and watched 300 guests fill the church around her. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comments section. The ceremony began at 2 o'clock. Grace arrived at the church in the same worn Nissan Sentra she drove everywhere, wearing a simple white gown she had purchased off a sample rack for less than $200. Her hair was done by a friend. She wore small pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. She walked down the aisle alone. No father, no family, no one on her side of the church at all. The whispers started immediately. Marcus could hear them from the altar, low, careful, the sound of a crowd exercising just enough restraint to pretend they weren't saying what they were saying. No family. Did you notice? Not one person. Where are her people? He kept his eyes on Grace. Only on Grace. She walked steadily. Her chin was level. Her eyes were fixed on his, and in her expression was something Marcus had never seen there before. A kind of tightly controlled emotion, like a door being held shut by both hands. The officiant had just opened his book when the church doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically. They simply opened, as doors do. But the sound moved through the room like a current, and 300 heads turned at once. Standing in the entrance were 12 people dressed in dark, elegant clothing. At their center was an elderly man in his mid-70s, silver-haired, upright, and utterly still. He wore a suit that was cut with the kind of precision that doesn't advertise itself. He carried a white handkerchief in his left hand, and he was looking at Grace. Grace had gone completely white. Marcus watched the color leave her face. He watched her hands, which had been perfectly steady for the entire walk down the aisle, begin to tremble. Then the elderly man began walking toward her, and Grace said, in a voice so small Marcus almost didn't hear it, "Father." The word fell into the silence of the church and lay there. Her father stopped 2 feet in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment, at the simple dress, the pearl earrings, the tear that was now making its way down her right cheek. And then his composure cracked quietly and completely, and he opened his arms. Grace stepped into them. The sound that left her was not crying exactly. It was the sound of something long compressed finally releasing. 3 years of distance and silence and carefully constructed separateness, dissolving in a single moment in the middle of a church in front of 300 strangers. Marcus stood at the altar and watched. He did not move. He did not speak. He just stood there and understood, with a certainty that arrived all at once rather than gradually, that the woman he was about to marry had been carrying something enormous, and that she had chosen, for reasons he didn't yet know, to carry it alone. After a long moment, Grace pulled back. She looked at her father. Then she turned and looked at Marcus with an expression that held a question and an apology and something that might have been relief, all at once. Marcus walked toward her. He took her hand. He said quietly, "Whatever this is, it's okay." She gripped his hand tighter than she ever had, and they turned back toward the altar together. The ceremony continued. The vows were exchanged in a hush so complete that Marcus could hear the candles burning. When it was done, when he had kissed his wife and turned to face the room, he looked out at 300 people who were either crying or stunned or both, and at his mother in the front row, who was sitting very still with an expression Marcus had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not embarrassment, but something that looked, underneath everything, like shame. The reception that followed was unlike any wedding Marcus had ever attended. After dinner, Grace's father stood and asked through the microphone if he might say a few words. He was a man named Richard Walker, and when he began to speak, the room grew so quiet you could hear the ice settling in the glasses. He spoke about his daughter, about the year her mother died, when Grace was 26, and the year that followed, when the family business had consumed him so entirely that his grief became invisible, and his relationship with the only person who still needed him quietly broke apart. He spoke about the argument, the terrible, irreversible feeling argument that had sent Grace out of their lives and into a silence so complete that for 3 years he had not known if she was safe. He had hired people to find her. Eventually they had, but Grace had communicated through a lawyer. She was well. She was choosing this life. She asked for space. He had given her the space because he was afraid of losing her entirely. When he learned 3 months ago, through a mutual contact, that she was getting married, that she had found someone, that she was happy, he had made a decision. He was going to come. Whether she wanted him there or not, he was going to show up, because some things matter more than pride. "My daughter," he said, looking at Grace, "left a life that most people would have given anything for, not because she was ungrateful, but because she understood something I had forgotten, that wealth without presence is just a large, empty room." He paused. "She has more character than I have built in 50 years of business, and the man she chose to marry," he looked at Marcus now, "chose her without knowing any of this, without knowing the name, the company, the inheritance. He chose who she actually is." He raised his glass. "That's the only kind of person I'd trust with my daughter." Later, after the speeches, after the first dance, after the cake, Evelyn found Grace standing alone near the garden doors, looking out at the parking lot where the black convoy still waited, quiet and patient in the evening light. Evelyn had been rehearsing this moment for 20 minutes. She had prepared an apology that was dignified and appropriate and carefully proportioned. She walked up beside Grace and opened her mouth to deliver it. Grace turned first, and she smiled, not politely, not carefully, but warmly, openly, the way you smile at someone you've already forgiven before they've asked. Evelyn's prepared speech collapsed entirely. "I owe you," she started. "You were protecting your son," Grace said. "I understand that. I was cruel. You were afraid." Grace paused. "I should have told him sooner. I should have told both of you. The secrecy wasn't fair to either of you, and I'm sorry for that." Evelyn stood very still. In 62 years, she could not remember the last time someone she had wronged had apologized to her before she finished apologizing to them. "Family," Grace said quietly, "isn't about where you come from. It's about where you choose to stay." Evelyn's composure, which had survived a great deal that day, did not survive this. She reached out and held Grace's hand with both of hers. And for the first time since Marcus had told her he was getting married, she felt the knot she'd been carrying in her chest. The fear, the pride, the terrible certainty that her son was ruining his life. Finally, slowly loosen. In the months that followed, the world did not change as dramatically as the tabloids that briefly covered the story suggested it would. Marcus and Grace did not move into a penthouse. They stayed in their apartment for another year before buying a modest house on the edge of town, with a garden Grace filled with vegetables. Marcus continued teaching. Grace continued working at the nonprofit, though now as its largest donor, having established a foundation that directed a substantial portion of the Walker family inheritance toward food security, education, and early childhood development across the state. Grace's father became a regular presence. He flew in every few months, stayed in a local hotel. Grace insisted on this, and he accepted, and slowly, carefully, with a lot of quiet conversations and a few difficult ones, rebuilt what had broken. Evelyn came to Sunday dinner every week. She and Grace would cook together in the kitchen while Marcus sat at the table pretending to grade papers and actually listening to the two of them talk. And he would think, sometimes with a kind of overwhelming fullness, about a woman who had arrived at a food pantry one rainy Thursday evening with no announcement and no fanfare, and had simply stayed until the work was done. There is a version of this story that is about money, about the shock of a hidden fortune, the drama of a family reunion, the satisfaction of watching a proud woman brought low and a quiet woman vindicated. But that is not, if you've been paying attention, what this story is actually about. It's about a woman who understood something rare, that the most radical thing you can do in a world organized around status is to choose to be known for your character instead. It's about a man who loved a person before he knew her story, and discovered that this was, in the end, the only way to love anyone. And it's about a mother who learned, late, painfully, and permanently, that the people most worth knowing are the ones who don't need you to know what they're worth. Because sometimes the ones who arrive the quietest are carrying more than you can imagine. And sometimes the greatest embarrassment in a room full of judgment is the judgment itself. When pride closes our eyes, humility opens our hearts. What would you have done if you were Marcus? Would you have trusted Grace, even knowing she was hiding something? Have you ever been judged before someone knew your story? Share it in the comments. Every story matters here. And if this moved you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The next story is already waiting, and it's going to hit even harder than this one. We'll see you there.